Hi, this is Dara, and this is a video walkthrough of a Unity character Foley system. It's a system that basically automates between different surfaces, between game objects and the terrain. And you can also build out your character sounds from what the material they've got on their lower body and material for their upper body. And you can also equip them with some equipment sounds. And there's also a preview button on the inspector so you can audition your sounds. And the sounds in this example have been specialized. I was just experimenting to see what it would sound like to pre-bake the sounds and put them in. And I'm not quite sure on how I feel about the sounds doing that, so you may want to swap out the sounds if anyone does use this system. And another thing, a lot of the code and scripting in this is just prototyping, so it's not being fully optimized. Okay, so with that out of the way, then I'm just gonna jump into it and talk about the different features. Okay, so when you first open the Unity project, if you've downloaded it, there's a _DC assets folder, and this contains all the scripts and the example scenes. And there's also some prefabs in here, so you can get off to a quick start. You can grab the third-person controller variant, and you can also swap out the character on that if you wish. If you would like to use your own sounds in the project, if you look inside the audio assets folder, in clothing, you'll find clothing SGO for scriptable game object. And in here you can click and you can see it's got all the different elements that make up that will make up those sounds. The same thing for equipment. Again, contains all the audio clips that are required. And if we go to Footsteps, you've got 4 custom slots. So if you want to just add on to the existing database of sounds, you can just add your own sounds in here. Now with these ones, it's important to note that the Footstep system is actually using concatenation, where it's playing the heel and then playing the toes instantly afterwards. And depending on your settings, that can vary. So you'll want to put in your heel steps for clips number 1, and then your toe steps for clip number 2. Okay, so now to look into the system a little bit more. So if I open up the third-person controller, you can see there's the couple of things on here. That's important, but the first thing we're going to look at is the character sounds. And in Footsteps, you will see you've got a custom inspector. This isn't finished, so you might notice when you're playing the game might be a few bugs pop up, and that's describing some things that isn't quite set up right, but it shouldn't affect the gameplay experience. It still runs smoothly for that. But looking in here, you can see we've got these are basically switches, so I can hit concrete and preview what that sounds like. I can hit wood. If you have your own custom slots in, you can try those. Down here you've got your volume control, and this will pretty much add and subtract this amount or a random number in between that amount. And you can also enable your pitch modulation to do the same thing. You've got a low pass filter and high pass filter, and you also have a Footstep nuisance controller. I'll talk about that in a second. So up here as well, we've got some quick presets. So if you're not too familiar with setting up the pitch and volume and filter and modulation, you can hit a clean preset, which was what was running on the intro. You can hit a subtle, which will add subtle modulation to like the volume, the pitch, and the filters. You can do that moderately, or you can apply it heavily. You can also control, this is an exposed power meter, so you can control the delay for the toe hitting down, which can be good if the character's walking slow. You can also turn on heel toe automation, which will automate that speed depending on how fast or slow your character is walking. And this is the response time of how quickly it should react to like the heel toe. So this is best if you want like a longer delay, you would still turn this up. But I find down quite low for this character, for the Unity one, seems to work best because even when he's walking slow, um, his heel and toe are hitting the ground still quite fast. But it's also useful for when the character goes over a certain speed, it will, rather than do heel toe, it will actually combine the heel and toe together so you get one thump. So it gives the impression that the character is running on their toes, which is quite nice. It will also automate the volume. So as the character is moving faster, the volume will ramp up. And as the character is moving slow, the volume will come down and become much quieter. The nuisance controller. This was inspired by the video game Limbo and also a blog post by sound designer Bjorn Jacobson. He's working on the current Cyberpunk game. But what this does, when we turn this on, you can see we've got a target volume of 1. Up here, currently the base volume is at 1. I can turn this down to say 0.5, and then this number down here, slowest to quickest, is with every footstep it's going to take off this value off the value up here. So the reason why you would do this is when you're walking on the same surface for a long period of time, it can become repetitive and a bit of a nuisance of a sound. And by using this method, every time we are walking on a surface, it will subtly reduce the volume. And then as we hit a new surface, the volume will go back to its original value, which would be 1, and then gradually make its way back down again. So we can simulate this in the with the audio preview at the top. And if I was just test this now, you can see the volume slowly coming down. And if I change it now to walking on dirt, our volume jumps back up to 1 and then starts to make its way back down again. This is just a good way of testing and just customizing your character Foley sounds without actually having to go into the level and test it. And the method is just calling the footstep, so it's the same as playing the game, except you save a little bit of time. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is the clothing and equipment, and it's in a similar style to the footsteps, so it should be familiar when you come across, where you can preview the sound, you can reset, and you've got your presets. Down at the bottom here we've got the modulation, so again we can set the base volume and then we can set how much we want to subtract and add to the value here, and then we're going to pick a random number between those two values. The clothing and equipment section is done through enums, which is going to call the right sounds to play depending on what you set up here. So you got your lower body, you can choose between 2 materials. The cargo is kind of like a cotton sound, and the lower body and the upper body have been both spatialized. So usually when you combine the materials, you'll get like a darker sound for the bottom and a brighter sound for the top. And you can save some resources if you brought in your own sounds and it was just a default Foley sound, and it was that would have a nice bottom and a nice top end. You can also do your accessories. So what if your character has got like a gun belt or some kind of metallic or maybe a backpack, you can choose the extra type of sounds in here. So right now there's some stuff selected, so we'll just test what we've got. So when you add that to the footstep sound, you get a more natural sound, because it's probably a bit strange if the character was just making footstep sounds and no other type of equipment or material sound. If we could try it at night. And we got a military, just much more quiet and subtle. And the adventurer, and they're quite similar. Okay, and the next thing we want to check is on the actual player character, and it is the Foley event trigger. And this is where you can call all the different sounds. So for example, you can call the footstep sound from here. You can call the equipment and the material sounds from here. So if you want to get really specific, you can sync those up to the animation. There's also an overall one where you can just call a movement that will cover all those aspects. Now, one important thing on here is this section here, the terrain texture sync. And essentially, it's got texture 0, texture 1, texture 2, and so on and so on. And depending, these align with the terrain system inside of Unity. So if I find the terrain, I'm not sure where I've put it. Let's come in here. And if we look at the floor texture, so for example, this would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So you want to make sure that these are syncing up with the right type of sound that you want to hear. So if you're not hearing the right sound and you're using your own system, it's probably because you haven't synced up the terrain properly. So if we come back in and just look at that again. So you see the first one, I've selected rock, and then and so on. Another thing is this is quite costly to run this method because it's checking the splat. It's essentially like a switch inside a switch, because we've got this raycast down here which is checking the surface, and depending on what surface you're stepping on, you've got these game objects. These don't cost too much. It's able to raycast down, tell what the surface is depending on the tag. And if it's tagging the terrain system, though, the terrain can have various textures on it, so it sends it to another switch, which will then work out what the splat texture is to work out the right type of terrain sound to play. So in order to try and manage the resources, you've got this surface check interval, and you can actually set this up quite, maybe not a second, this is in seconds, but usually around here you can still get really good results. And if it's running every frame, that's where it starts to cost a lot. So if you want the system to be really responsive, then you want to bring this slider down. And if you want to preserve performance, you want to put it to a threshold of how much you think is acceptable of a slight delay. And the next system we're going to look at is what happens when the character gets wet. So as the character gets wet, we want some of the material and the shoes to stay wet for a period of time before they dry, and you can set how long it takes for the character to dry. So what we'll do to just quickly demonstrate what's happening is I'll go to the audio mixer, and we'll look for, we'll use the layer wet feet. There's also one for the clothes, which would be here, but we'll look at this one. And it's currently set. I'll turn this up to make it more obvious. That mightn't sound that good when it's this loud. You'd start this more subtle at a lower dB. And to show you where you can get this as well, it's actually in the script. And the script we designed for that is character wet trigger. It's this one, and what you would do is you would actually place that onto any water in your scene. So as you can see, it comes on here and the script looks like this. And this is how quickly your character will dry. So down here, it's going to take a long period of time. Towards the right side, of the slider, it will be much quicker. So I'm going to put the mixer on and we'll play this scene. And I'll run into this water. And if you look just here, you can see the slider is automatically adjusting down. And one thing that was important is if the character re-enters the water, you obviously want it to reset. So just an extra bit of logic that makes sense if the character re-enters the water. And if you're curious at all how that works, essentially it's just two triggers. So as the character enters the water, it's gonna trigger the enter collision, which just lets it know. Really, this one's just letting us know the character's in the water. Up here we've got the on trigger exit, and that is what triggers it's a coroutine, and the coroutine's like a timer, and it's running on time.delta time, so the time between frames it will take for the character to come dry is dependent on the slider that was on the inspector. So that is pretty much that. Thanks for stopping by and checking out the character Foley system for Unity. I'm going to post a link in the description where you can download the project and you can take parts from it or do whatever you want to it or experiment. If you would like to see any more features added to it, and there's also going to be a link to just a short survey down there as well in the description that you can fill out, and I'll see if I can add anything else into it. And I'll end this video with the character Foley system running with some settings that I quite liked. Thank you.